Well, we have been talking about the cycle for quite a while, and we'll continue to because I think it's super important. It's the second greatest commandment of loving your neighbors, treating your neighbors as you would treat yourself, to love your neighbors the way that you love yourself, and to move them to teach them who God is. That's the greatest commandment, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And moving people who love God and who are taught about the commandments of God to serving others. James is clear when he says faith without works is dead. And Paul says that we were created for good works. We've got to serve other people. We can't just sit on our hands and say that we're faithful Christians. It doesn't work that way. And then, of course, moving people back to loving neighbors and repeating this cycle. Our theme this year is becoming the hands and the feet of Jesus. And our theme verses come from Matthew 25, 37 through 40. And it says this: Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you a drink? And when did we see you a stranger and welcome you, or naked and clothe you? And when did we see you sick or in prison and visit you? And the king will answer them, truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these, my brothers, you did it to me. And of course, this passage is talking about separating the sheep from the goats. It's heaven and hell. The people who gave drinks to the thirsty, who fed the hungry, who clothed the naked, those people are separated and put at the right hand of God. And then the shepherd will take the goats, the people who claimed that they were followers, but they didn't do these things, and they'll separate and go to the left hand of the shepherd. And Jesus says those will be the goats, and their destination is, of course, hell. It's that important. So today we're talking about a kind of a subsection of that, and something that Christians get caught up in a lot. And that's finger pointing and traditions and clinging to traditions. And we've all seen this and experienced it. And when I was growing up, and I guess it's not so recent anymore, but some of you older folks will remember the term change agent. How many of you remember the term change agent? Yeah. Some of you, some of you older, more seasoned folks here, remember the term change agent. And I remember being young and hearing that term, and I was like, thinking it was a really good thing. And I'm like, man, I want to be a change agent. And, I almost wanted to go around and just tell people, tap them on the shoulder and be like, I'm a change agent for Jesus. Well, change agent was a derogatory term. You didn't want to be labeled a change agent, because that meant that you were a heretic. So it wouldn't have been good if young Jimmy went around telling people that I was a change agent for the church. That would have gotten me labeled very quickly and probably kicked out of the church altogether. But people who labeled people as change agents loved being the sheriff of the church. They would have their imaginary sheriff's badge, and they would deputize themselves, and they would go around and they would sniff out the heresies within the church. You all know what I'm talking about, some of the older folks. They would look for people who are doing things wrong so that they could point it out and prove that there were change agents who were embedded secretly within the church, almost as if they were secret spies that were embedded throughout the church. And I remember when I first started here at this church, 16 years ago, if you can believe that. Actually, this month marked my 16-year anniversary working full-time with the Somerset Church of Christ. And I remember for a long time I was getting letters, and I don't remember the guy's name because I blocked it out, but he would write handwritten letters, really long letters, and it was almost weekly. And I don't know how I became a recipient, but I assumed that he was doing this all over the country. He would find churches and he would label the newest change agents for the week. And he had a whole list. And he would list what they were doing wrong and how they were abandoning scripture and they were bringing about all these changes in the church. And it was just like these big, long rants. And I was like, man, I'll bet he is a lovely person to live with. I'll bet his family gathers around and they're like, Grandpa, tell us some stories. Well, let me tell you about the change agents in the church. He just was so grumpy. And his letters were very nasty. They had a nasty tone. And so who were the change agents? Well, change agents would do things like if they supported our Christian colleges, our Christian universities, that was a change agent. Anybody who supported any missionaries, they were change agents. That's not the job of the church. And on the list goes. It goes and it grows because it was a never-ending list. So where did this come from? There's actually a lot of history, and so today I'm going to talk a little bit about history because it's just interesting, at least to me. And I hope some of you find some of this interesting as well, because some of that history and the history of change agents and sniffing out heretics has direct links to this congregation. As you know, we're an older congregation. This was founded in 1910 by Mr. and Mrs. Parkhill. This is William Parkhill. He and Mrs. Parkhill, Luella Parkhill, who Luella Hogger was named after. So if any of you older people knew Luella Hogger, she was named after Luella Parkhill. So William Parkhill, he died in 1916, the year that this church building was built and dedicated. His wife, Luella, she passed away in 1940. She was very wealthy, and she built this building and paid in cash. And they dedicated it in December of 1916. This is Benjamin Franklin, not the founding father Benjamin Franklin, but Benjamin Franklin of the Restoration Movement, of which we come out of. Benjamin Franklin was the first, recognized person who sniffed out the heretics within the church. He made it his mission to sniff people out and to write about it. So he had a paper, trying to see if I remember. It was called the American. It's leaving my brain right now. I can't remember exactly what his paper was called off the top of my head, but he had a paper, and he would write about all things church and, of course, the Restoration Movement and the Bible-believing Christians only, because that was our motto. Bible things by Bible names. It was a back to the Bible basics. Let's get rid of all denominational creeds and let's just read the Bible. A pretty pure movement, if you ask me. I think it began out of necessity. Because the church back in both England and Scotland, they were very oppressive, and they wanted to break away from these denominational ties. And they said, why do we need all these creeds and all these rules and all these man-made things when we have our Bibles? But it quickly turned into this idea that in the Bible we've got to sniff out the heretics who disregard the Bible. And so Benjamin Franklin, who, by the way, is related to the founding father, Benjamin Franklin. He was a fourth generation relative of the Benjamin Franklin. But this Benjamin Franklin, he made it his goal to sniff out the heretics in the church. And boy, was he efficient at doing it, if you catch my drift. So he's writing this paper for a while, and come along this man, Daniel Summer, who decided he's going to take over that religious paper, and he's going to take on that effort to sniff out the heretics in the church. So Daniel Summer, who happened to die the same year as Mrs. Parkhill in 1940, he takes over Benjamin Franklin's paper and he renames it the Octographic Review. And he's writing about people who are heretics and all the bad people. And he He's on such a mission to do it that this man single-handedly is attributed, given credit for the split between the non-instrumental churches of Christ and the disciples who later would be called the Christian churches or instrumental churches of Christ. In 1906, it became really official when David Lipscomb, who of course founded Lipscomb University, David Lipscomb was asked the question, are the churches of Christ and disciples a distinct and separate group? To which he reluctantly said, they are. So in 1906, it was officially documented that there was a split within the Restoration churches. So do the math. 4 years later, Mrs. Parkhill splits from First Christian, and she starts the Somerset Church of Christ. They began in her living room, and then they moved to the courthouse, and then 6 years later, they built this building, and they began to worship here. What's interesting is Mrs. Parkhill and Daniel Summer were good friends. This, if you remember this from our 100-year anniversary, this paper is an actual photocopy of a letter written on a letterhead of the Octographic Review by Daniel Summer to Mrs. Parkhill. This was found right here in Somerset behind a fireplace mantle in Chris Philippi's house, which was the old Parkhill residence. Across from Somerset Floral, you'll see the Philippi trucks, or Philippi, however you say it. You'll see his trucks parked out in the driveway. He called me up one day and he's like, I have this piece of paper and it may or may not be significant to you. He's like, it's written on some paper called the Octographic Review, like Daniel Summer, some guy. I was like, what? And of course, I was like really into Restoration history. So I rushed over to his house and I found this letter. It was written July 28th, 1913. And he starts it, Dear Brother and Sister Parkhill. And it goes on, and of course, the whole letter is writing about this heretic in the church that they need to watch out for. What's really interesting, too, is that when this building was dedicated, this is in our meeting minutes, it says this. It's hard to read, but it says this. During the summer of 1916, Sister Luella Parkhill built a house of worship on East South Street. That's this building that you're sitting in right now. The house was opened December 3rd, 1916. Brother Daniel Summer preached 3 sermons on that occasion. In December of 1920, Brother and Sister Judy left Somerset for the Western States, and Brother Irvin Woodrow and wife located with Somerset. So that's when the Most family, Sarah Most and Lou Hogger, their father came here in 1920. But I tell you all this because it's interesting. There's a long history of this divisive sniffing out the heretics, which fortunately I don't think ever translated to this church. Even though Daniel Summer had strong ties here, I don't think this congregation ever became a church where we sniffed out the heretics and wanted to pinpoint people. Although when I look at the meeting minutes, a lot of people were excommunicated or kicked out of the church, like lots of people. So that was a form of discipline where if somebody did something wrong, they were immediately removed from the church. But I say all this to say that the scriptures don't tell us to be on a mission to sniff out the quote-unquote bad people, the change agents. The scriptures tell us that we're to lead a life of service, that we're to love our neighbor, and to love the Lord our God, and that we're supposed to serve people oftentimes without question. We roll up our sleeves and we find people who are thirsty, we find people who are hungry, we find people who are naked, and we clothe them, we feed them, and we give them water. And it's as simple as that. And oftentimes we We want so badly to find people, like we're on a mission to find people who are doing things wrong, that becomes our focus, and it always leads in division. Daniel Summer, he was famous for drawing lines in the sand. He would say, this is the line, and if you cross this line, you're outside of the fellowship. You're not really a believer. And the problem with that is that you become the judge and the jury, and virtually everybody ends up being on the wrong side of that line that's drawn in the sand. A lot of us have experienced this before in the workplace or in the church or just in different parts of society, where people draw these lines and they say, you cross this line, you're not really, you vote for a certain candidate and I will never talk to you again. Right? People started doing that politically in our culture. But the Bible is not so set against change if those changes are for God's kingdom. And here are some scriptures, and I love these scriptures. And I think it points us on a better path where we're not so divisive and where we can actually focus on God's kingdom and being kingdom people. Paul writes this in his second letter to the Corinthian church. He says, "From now on, therefore, we regard no one according to the flesh. Even though we once regarded Christ according to the flesh, we regard him thus no longer. Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he's a new creation. The old has passed away, and behold, the new has come. All this is from God, who through Christ reconciled us to himself and gave us the ministry of reconciliation." See, it's the opposite of drawing these lines in the sand. We want to draw lines in the sand, and I think that's part human nature, and that's part wanting to feel like we have a purpose. And that's why the Pharisees did that to Jesus so often. They were like, why do your disciples eat without washing their hands? That's not the tradition of the Jewish people. And Jesus would come back and say, you whitewash tombs, you ignore the commands of God for the sake of your traditions. Right? It's drawing that line in the sand saying, you're not part of us. You're not part of the community. You're not part of the Christian, well, now we would say the Christian community, but then they would say the Jewish community. You're cut off. You're banned. And Paul's saying God gave us this ministry of reconciliation, where instead of drawing those lines in the sand over traditions, we draw people near to each other through the commands of Christ. That is, in Christ, God was reconciling the world to himself, not counting their trespasses against them, and entrusting to us the message of reconciliation. Romans 12:2 says, "Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God." Not what you feel is the will of God, not where you say, okay, well, Daniel Summer, he was pretty well known, and these are the lines in the sand that he drew, therefore that must be biblical. These must be biblical lines in the sand, because Daniel Summer said this is where he draws the line. But Paul says, no. You need to be transformed by the renewal of your mind through Christ, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. In Isaiah 43:19 through 21, it says this, "Behold, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs forth. Do you not perceive it? I will make a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert. The wild beasts will honor me, the jackals and the ostriches." By the way, have you ever seen an ostrich ever honor anything? They're the meanest, nastiest little animals. Do you ever try to feed them go through a safari? Do you ever see what they did? We have some funny pictures of ostriches that they come in and their head is sideways and their mouth is open, and they try to bite your arm off, trying to get the food. They're really funny, naughty animals. But God says, I'm doing this new thing. I'm making rivers in the desert. In the least expected place, I'm going to let rivers spring forth. I'm going to have the wild beasts honor me. Jackals and the ostriches, they'll give honor to me. I will give water in the wilderness, rivers in the desert, to give drink to my chosen people. The people whom I formed for myself, that they might declare my praise. See, our purpose is to honor God. It's to let God bring up these wells in these desert places within us. When we feel dry and empty and barren, God says, I'm going to do something new. I'm going to renew you. I'm going to build you up. I'm going to bring strength to you. I'm going to give drink to you. And interestingly, Jesus meets with the woman at the well in Samaria, and he says, if only you knew who it was who asked you for a drink, you would realize that I can give you a well that never dries up. I can give you living water. God renews us, and he gives us this ministry of reconciliation to come together and to bond people through his love and through service to one another. And I think a lot of times, looking back at the restoration history, I think if Daniel Summer had been so busy giving water to the thirsty and food to the hungry and shelter to those who didn't have shelter, I think if he was busy doing those things, he wouldn't have had time to try to sniff out the heretics. You know, he made that his life mission. He was nicknamed the watchdog. At Bethany College over in West Virginia, they dubbed him the watchdog because he was known for literally watching for people. He would wait for people to mess up so that he could write about it in the Autographic Review. He could put them on blast. Yet we look at social media today and we're like, man, boy, social media is ruining people and people can put anybody on blast. Oh, believe me, they were putting people on blast before social media. Daniel Summer was the king of putting people on blast. But God comes back and he says, I'm renewing you people. I'm building up my chosen people. I'm restoring you and rebuilding you. That you can declare my praise. That you can go out and show people who I am through service and honor and love. And I think as Christians, we've been put in this really important position within the kingdom to be able to reconcile people through the love of Christ and through service, so that all of us together can declare God's praise. That's why we're here. That's why God gives us the talents that we have and the abilities that we have. It's for the edification and the building up of the church, the equipping of the saints to be able to go out and serve people and reconcile people back to God through Jesus Christ. That's your message this week. I pray that you go out and bless people. Just bless people. Find ways to bless them. It's hot outside. I think it's no surprise. It's no secret. It's been a hot, muggy, humid week. Literally give water to people. Find a police officer and hand him or her a drink of water. Give it to your mailmen. They're in those hot trucks with no air conditioning. It's miserably hot. FedEx. Even FedEx. DP said, give it to your bug man. They have air conditioning. Those bug people, they're set. Trust me. These bug people, they're set. FedEx, UPS, USPS, we'll bless them. That's right. People out doing landscaping. It's hot out there. Find people and bless them this week. And I promise God will honor that. And that'll be a good reflection of the church out there in the community. If there's anybody this morning who has prayer needs or anybody who's not yet taken the step to put Christ on in baptism and you're ready, we'd invite you to come up as we all stand and sing this song together. Jared.